Today's video is a clip from my membership site, FromTheField.tv. This is the place that I post 95% of the content that I now make. It's all hyper detailed, no clickbait, no catchy thumbnails, no catchy titles. It is all with the intent of delivering high value information to you guys. The last 18 months of me traveling around North America, visiting experts in regenerative and sustainable agriculture, as well as some high-tech farms. It's all up there, and all the videos of me developing my new farm are up at FromTheField.tv. Head over there and check it out. My guest today is Dan Cloutier, and in this video, Dan and I will be discussing some of the major problems coming around the corner with agriculture and the food system. And you might be familiar with Dan. We visited him last year at his aquaponics greenhouse, which is at the Sprung headquarters. Dan has a company called ARC, Agro Resilience Kit. Dan does a lot of consulting for greenhouses and sustainable regenerative energy projects. And I consider Dan an expert in that field. Him and I often have conversations about problems and solutions. He's a big thinking guy. He's got a lot of ideas and a lot of solutions. And in this video, Dan kind of outlines some of the bigger problems with the agricultural conventional food system that's coming around the corner: food inflation, energy inflation, and fertilizer inflation. And Dan is going to present 11 solutions to these. And you're going to love how so much of this comes back to solutions that we as small farmers can take and do something with right now. So I hope you get a lot of value out of this one.
So in terms of intelligent responses, I'm going to kick around a few things, start with the kind of big picture with some stuff just I think is worth thinking about in terms of arable land. I'll talk about some things in terms of how do you marry meat production with, or protein production with produce and vegetables, and at the same time as you're reducing costs. And I think there's a whole bunch of intelligent responses and opportunity in that. So it might seem like a strange place to start, but I like starting with Egypt in this way. We can see what their population numbers are. Egypt's a really interesting comparison, and we're going to compare Canada in a second. They're down in the bottom quartiles in terms of rainfall. They don't get very much. So that 2% doubling, fighting for that small amount of rainfall, you just don't have the arable land. And as always has been the case, is that Egypt was a great producer for 3,000, 4,000 years, whatever, and it's been the Nile River, isn't it? Or hasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's the landmass that you see there for the Nile River. Now that's under duress right now because, Ethiopia would like to have some electricity, and so they're damming the Blue Nile, and so the Nile River's projected to shrink very dramatically.
Wow.
Now, all the arable land that Egypt has, not that big a country in landmass, about 3% of the country is arable, and that's only 6.89 million acres, even though they have, almost 3 times the population of Canada. So they import 40% of their food. 50% of our calorie intake is grains, and they import 60% of that. Doesn't look too sustainable, does it?
Not really.
And they, like so many countries around the world, used to be an exporter of oil all the way to in the early 2000s, but now they're an importer of oil as well. So 2 necessities: energy and food. You're importing. Boy, you better have some really good economic engines, banking or software or something, right? What did they have? Well, they had tourism. right? That was,
Yeah.
a really big engine. Anyway, the Canadian population, we don't think of ourselves as having that extreme of population growth, but we've been around 1.2%. We've bumped up with immigration being handled the way it is and so forth. We think of ourselves as being just, incredible amounts of water, and there's truth to some of that. We're 7% of the world's freshwater. Lots of times people don't look at the fact that about 60% of that water flow is to the Arctic. So in terms of arable land, it's lots of water, but it's a surprising amount that doesn't go to arable land or particularly warm areas. And so out of our huge landmass, only 13% is arable. So it's certainly significantly more than Egypt in comparison. So all that points to opportunities. But isn't it interesting? All of those numbers going in our favor, and our export only exceeds our imports in food by 30%.
It's crazy.
And so, what I would say is that we have a real opportunity not to do what Egypt's done in terms of sustainability, and not to do what the world's done when you look at this graph down at the bottom, right? But how many farmers even look at it this way?
I don't know.
And let alone how many people in government. And the other thing that I do like pointing out is there's a number of intelligent responses that say it doesn't have to be just in ground. There's a number of ways that we can increase arable land. So this is a project we're really proud of, that we've been working for 3 going on 4 years with a New York Stock Exchange company called New Skin and their division called Grove. And Grove has a sprung structure that they've put these vertical towers in. And so what happens with these vertical towers is seeds are automatically put in these trays, and then they circle around, and part of the time they're under LED grow lights, and then part of the time you can see it's dark and they get rest areas.
Crazy.
And in these towers, what happens is this is essentially microgreens.
Yeah.
It's cattle fodder though, and it's a specific blend for dairy cattle. And so the seed comes into one tower and comes back out, as you see on the conveyor here, every 6 days, and every 30 seconds one of these trays from 10 towers is dropping onto this conveyor belt, and you can see the fodder there.
Yeah.
And that is going directly to 17,000 head of dairy cattle.
Far out.
So that's in a building that's 100 foot wide by 160 feet long. And what Grove has proven they're able to do in that amount of space, which is well under an acre, they're able to replace 1,000 acres of cropland.
Wow.
So that's an example, and I believe we can dream up many, many of these kinds of examples of increasing arable land in these sorts of ways.
Mm-hmm.
What's even more important in a lot of ways is when you think about this kind of way of growing and the water conservation that's possible, the dramatically reduced insecticide and fertilizer use. Seeds as they're microgreens, they don't really have any use for fertilizer to speak of. So it's also really efficient in that way, or efficiently added arable land. And then the next really interesting thing is the line that Grove has come up with is they've developed a system that gives the micro greens a perfect grow day every day. And the microgreens that they feed to the dairy cattle go a long way in trying to give a perfect day to a dairy cow every day. And what that means is that they actually are producing significantly more milk with this, as they're creeping up to 40% of their feed. I don't think they'll go beyond 40%. And the nutrient level in the milk is dramatically improved.
Yeah.
So, kinds of opportunities.
Can I ask one question about that? Just that growth
by
thing
all means.
is, I mean, you're an energy guy. You really understand almost more than anybody I know these inputs and outputs. Like, I mean, yes, I believe the claim at face value, at least, of the point about arable land, but when you're really counting energy in to, say, calories out, just looking at that image, the massive amount of aluminum and stainless steel and LED lights and electronics and CPU boards and all the kind of technology and equipment in there, how profitable is it? I mean, I guess I'm not so much interested in the profit of it. I'm sure that's an important part of it, but I'm just kind of curious, as like, this infrastructure wasn't cheap to build that facility. Like, is there
No.
how as far as their return on it, how economical is it?
There's a number of things that I think are very fascinating. When these guys first started with their business plan, they were like, well, you know what? We think microgreens are really cool, and we think we have a mousetrap that we can build that allow us to produce more in a smaller space. And then they looked at it and they said, well, in that level of production, how many restaurant customers would we need, and how far do we need to ship product to? And they ended up, I think, making a very intelligent choice there too, where they said, holy, we would have to be shipping product all over North America.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how do we differentiate ourselves in that? Like, can we make that different of product? And does it make any financial sense? And their answer at the end of the day was no. It doesn't look good to us at all. And so that made them scratch their head. They literally, hey, we have a solution. We're not sure what the problem is yet, which is often not a very good way to come at it. But the way they ended up coming at it is they asked a lot of questions of fellow farmers and so forth. And the dairy cattle guys said, well, gee, 17,000 head of dairy cattle can consume all of this on one site. And so your transportation cost is the length of that conveyor belt.
Right.
So their dollars per square foot are off the charts as compared to greenhouse guys. So the payback is very, very fast. But the farmers that are going to get after that have to understand it and be close to those sorts of dairy operations and scale their building to those sorts of dairy operations. There will be opportunities like this, in my view, with chickens and hogs and so forth. As you know, we like talking about aquaponics, and one of our things that we're working a little bit with Rob Avis and Dakota Cohn on is, well, gee, can we emulate feeding aquaponics with some plants that would work like this? And so we're working with a native food for the salmon that we grow, which is duckweed.
Hmm.
So it's really early days. Don't have anything, to say, well, that's a winner yet. And we're certainly not trying to automate it remotely like this at this time.